What is the trashiest thing somebody has done at your family Thanksgiving? Every Thanksgiving with my mother-in-law is an adventure. My wife and I host about 15 people, and everyone brings side dishes, as is the custom. Everyone, that is, except her mother. She only brings food for herself. She even proudly announces that whatever she brought is just for her. It's not for dietary reasons either, because she eats everyone else's food too. When dessert comes out, she always makes a big scene about wanting the first piece instead of letting the kids go first so they can get out of the way. One year, there was an argument about the corner pieces of a chocolate cake. She went first, as usual, and helped herself to 2 corner pieces. If you ever want to make a bunch of little kids cry, that's how. She wouldn't give them up either. To top it off, she treats our guest room and bathroom like a hotel. When she leaves, she takes the toilet paper rolls, the Kleenex box, paper towels, soap, everything. Edit. Just to address some of the comments all at once, she's not overweight and she's not senile. She gets invited every year because my wife is her only family and she'd feel tremendously guilty if she didn't include her. Not much of an excuse, I know, but that's why. And if you're horrified by what you've read so far, trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I could really make your head spin with stories from the other 364 days of the year. Here are a few more highlights, or lowlights depending on your perspective. A local bank once ran a summer promotion where they kept a freezer stocked with free ice cream bars for customers. She got banned from the bank because she went there every day, took 2 ice cream bars, and brought them home. She wasn't even a customer. Eventually, they told her not to come back. In the 20 years I've been with my wife, her mother has never once offered to cook a meal, pay for a meal, watch our kids, or help with them in any way. The last time she was invited over, she brought half a tray of pastries. My wife asked about it, and it turned out she had taken the leftovers from a party she'd attended, pastries that had already been picked over by who knows who. We told her to throw them out, but she just put them back in her car. She also has a bizarre obsession with cake. If she's at a restaurant and there's a birthday party nearby, she'll actually go over to the table and ask if she can have a slice of their cake. I wish I were kidding. Last Christmas, she stole my mother's prescription eyeglasses, bright red, while hers are black, claiming she thought they were hers. When she got caught, she planted a black sweater in my mom's guest room and accused her of taking it. Another time, she showed up unannounced to one of our family vacations with a friend in tow and expected us to take them both to dinner 5 minutes after we arrived. We don't tell her when we go on vacation anymore. And yes, I could keep going. Story 2. My aunt got drunk and then got unclothed. She ran down the street like that after hitting on my cousin's boyfriend. Her kids saw the whole thing, all of them under the age of 12. The next day, she cried non-stop because everyone was mad at her. I ended up calling CPS after that because she tried to drive drunk with the kids in the car. A few weeks later, she got drunk again. At the same house, this time by the pool. She lost her balance stepping near the pool filter, fell forward, and tried to catch herself with the hand holding her beer bottle. The glass shattered, and shards went into her cheek and neck. She hit the ground, passed out, and rolled into the pool. She would have drowned if people hadn't pulled her out. She's still an alcoholic. She's not invited to Thanksgivings anymore because she now does meth. Update. My family thought it was hilarious that this post got so many upvotes. I'm at my mom's family's house now. This story is about my dad's sister. My mom's side is definitely more hick, but with fewer addiction problems. Also, apparently, I got the story backward. The pool incident actually happened first. She still had stitches on her face and neck when she ran down the street naked. And no, for those asking, she's not hot. Update 2. After years of no contact, she showed up at my parents' house 2 days ago. She'd been homeless for 12 days, living in her car. She kicked her ex-con boyfriend out for the night so she could park in my parents' driveway. After a few hours, she went back to him, probably because she needed to get high. Also, she just got fired from another nursing job. The last one let her go quietly without reporting her. Story 3. Every year, we had Thanksgiving at my grandparents' house. One year, everyone was there except for one aunt. She was sitting outside in her car, refusing to come in. It turned out she had taken out a credit card in my cousin's name while that cousin was serving in the Navy. My cousin found out on the drive over after opening her mail. The aunt had racked up more than $10,000 in debt under her name. Edit. My cousin didn't have to pay the debt. Her father made her mother repay it using part of her retirement savings. It turned out this incident was one of the first signs that my aunt was no longer in her right mind. My cousin chose not to press charges, and after her mother paid off the debt, she managed to rebuild her credit with some effort. There were a few other troubling things my aunt did over the years, though nothing quite like this. Sadly, her mental health only declined further. That Thanksgiving ended up being one of the last times our whole family gathered together like that. My uncle, aunt, and cousins never came back for Thanksgiving after that year. They did visit again later, but by then my aunt was heavily medicated and just wasn't the same person anymore. Story 4. My father's girlfriend sat at the head of the table at my house and acted like she was the hostess, monopolizing the entire conversation. I was basically her waitstaff. It was my first time meeting her. 5 years later, they're still together. But I haven't seen her in 4 years, 11 months, and 29 days. I should give more details. It wasn't just the head of the table scandal of 2013 that did her in for me. She told me I should eat very little to watch my figure. It was Thanksgiving dinner. Suggested I dye my hair. I actually like my natural color. And expressed disappointment in my husband's wardrobe choice for the evening. He looked perfectly fine. The grand finale came after the night was over, when she told my father I was a bitch after everything I'd done to make her comfortable. I should also mention she's 10 years older than my dad, 85 at the time, wears a full face of makeup, dyes her hair dark every week, and is incredibly superficial. Not exactly who I aspire to be when I'm in my 80s. I think she's jealous of my relationship with my father and constantly feels the need to assert herself as his number one. That's fine. I'm perfectly happy with the arrangement. I see my dad all the time and things are great between us. My kids got more than enough time with her back then, so they're thrilled they don't have to see her anymore. They adored my mother and were open to having a relationship with Dad's girlfriend, but she's so vain and ridiculous that it just wasn't possible. Story 5. An actual family fight broke out one Thanksgiving. We had to call the cops and everything. My grandpa got a fine. My uncle was arrested. And my step-grandmother's oldest daughter was arrested too. Before my uncle and grandpa passed away, we never let them live it down. It was glorious. And when I say fight, I mean people on the floor throwing punches. It was chaos. We never went back to my grandpa's for Thanksgiving after that. I was about 8 or 9 at the time. Bonus round. We did go back one year, and my aunt gave us all food poisoning. My mom was literally dragging my brother and me into the ER because it was that bad. I have not eaten anything she's cooked since. Story 6. Faked a heart attack. It was very surreal. And her husband was so embarrassed. Eat it. Here's what happened. My grandmother didn't like my dad very much, and she picked a fight with him. Eventually, he'd had enough and decided to go home. When Grandma M realized that my stepmom, her daughter, was taking my dad's side and planned to leave with him, she completely lost it. After yelling for a while, she made one final dramatic attempt to stop them. She clutched her chest and very carefully collapsed to the ground. It was outside, and I guess she didn't want to bump her head or mess up her clothes. My dad offered to call 911, but my grandfather calmly said it wasn't necessary. When Grandma realized no one was taking her seriously, she opened her eyes, let my grandfather help her up, and went inside with him while fake sobbing. Normally, she was a kind person, but she had her moments, and she really didn't like that her daughter had grown up and built a life of her own. Holidays tended to bring out the worst in her, which was ironic because she genuinely loved cooking and celebrating. Story 7. Pudding Wars. When I was a kid, my grandmother made banana pudding for Thanksgiving, homemade custard, meringue, the works. It was legendary. Every year, my mom and her brother would go to war over it, each trying to keep the other from getting their share. One year, my uncle broke into our house just to steal the pudding. After that, my grandma started making decoy pudding and hiding the real one somewhere safe. But then came the year that took the cake. My grandmother decided she was done making the pudding altogether. My great-aunt stepped in and offered to make it instead. When she arrived with her contribution, my mom snatched the tray of pudding straight from her hands and bolted into my grandmother's bedroom, yelling for my younger cousin to bring her a spoon. She locked herself inside, fully prepared to eat herself sick on that banana pudding. Unfortunately, my great-aunt can't cook. Instead of the smooth, creamy custard everyone expected, the pudding was full of scrambled egg bits, the classic result of heating custard too quickly without stirring constantly. Mom emerged from the room only moments later, utterly defeated, and spent the rest of dinner eating her turkey in sullen silence. Story 8. The Great Thanksgiving. Lasagna incident. My uncle and grandfather don't have a good relationship, but they were tolerating each other for the sake of Thanksgiving. My uncle was making lasagna, and my grandfather decided to help by grating the cheese. Since the kitchen was already packed, we usually have 15-20 people who all love to cook. He went to another room to do it. Everything seemed fine. I even brought in the cheese myself. Fast forward to dinner time. The food's coming out, and as tradition dictates, we start with the lasagna. That's when my grandfather, feeling proud of his contribution, made a joke. "I know you hate me, but at least I'm great." And that's when all hell broke loose. My uncle completely lost it, yelling about how nobody told him he was using tainted cheese. Then he shouted, "Duck it!" and flipped the entire table. Every dish, every plate of food, gone. My grandfather, not one to back down, called him outside to settle it. So out they went, and before we knew it, 2 grown men were fist-fighting in the backyard. It all ended when my uncle threw my grandfather into the pond behind the house. Grandpa hit a jagged rock on the way down and sliced his leg open. The rest of us, we ordered Chinese food and kicked my uncle out. Grandpa refused to go to the hospital because he'd had a little too much holiday joy by then. Unsurprisingly, my uncle hasn't come to Thanksgiving in years. Story 9. Almost trash, but not. I was at a huge Thanksgiving dinner at my son-in-law's brother's place. His redneck dad had been drinking and deep-frying turkeys all morning, mostly drinking, to be honest. At some point, he came inside and learned that his daughter's spouse had gone through a bit of a change, from Bill to Jane. Not exactly the most traditional time or place to come out, right? He marched right up to Bill, or Jane, and said, "Well, we all love you no matter what." And that was that. Then we all sat down and had a dinner that couldn't be beat. Story 10. The Thanksgiving Raid. My uncle, who'd been hiding out in Haiti for years during the baby doc days, somehow managed to sneak back into the country and showed up at our house for Thanksgiving. Not 45 minutes later, a bunch of federal agents busted in and took him away. I was maybe 11 or 12 at the time, and no one ever really explained what had happened. Edit. I talked to my mom about it while driving her to my sister's house. Turns out they prosecuted my uncle under the RICO Act for moving money in and out of Haiti for baby doc. According to my mom, I didn't see him much, and this all happened when I was pretty young. He was incredibly intelligent, but crooked from day one. He'd moved millions of dollars around while people in Haiti were struggling just to eat. He was the kind of person who worked harder at avoiding work than at actually doing anything useful for society. They searched our house too and took all my dad's guns. He was an avid deer and pheasant hunter, and it took over a year to get them back. I vaguely remember him buying a new deer rifle around that time, but honestly, I was a kid. My attention span was about that of a gnat. Story 11. My family invited a relative who everyone had learned earlier that year had essayed me throughout my childhood up until I was 18. My mother then pulled me aside and told me that forgiveness is the spirit of the holiday. I, of course, cried and was extremely terrified to be in the same room as him. My siblings responded by ranting that I was being dramatic and narcissistic. I never spent another holiday with them or spoke to them again. To this day, they say that I ruined the family, while that person babysits their kids. Story 12. About a decade ago, my cousin, who was a junior in high school, finally got himself a girlfriend. She didn't come to Thanksgiving, but everyone wanted to see what she looked like. So he brought a picture, and we passed it around the table. Each person took a look, made a comment, and handed it to the next. Most of the men in the family were drunk, and when they got the photo, every one of them said something along the lines of, "Hey, she looks familiar," followed by a story about the time they banged her. Of course, they meant it as a joke, but it was unbelievably classless. This was my cousin's first girlfriend, and he's not exactly the frat boy alpha male type to appreciate that kind of ribbing. He's actually the smartest person in the family by far. Eventually, he left the state for college, became a doctor, and never came back for Thanksgiving again. He did, however, show up at a family wedding, where, naturally, all those same guys lined up to ask him for free medical advice. Story 13. This was years ago, back when electric ice cream makers were still relatively new, or at least when affordable ones were. For Thanksgiving, my wife's family decided that instead of people baking desserts, we'd all make homemade ice cream together after dinner. We used good ingredients and the ice cream came out amazing. Rich, creamy, high-quality stuff. Everyone had fun, and the kids especially loved being part of it. But when we were done making it, my wife's aunt set the homemade ice cream aside and pulled out a tub of cheap store-brand stuff for the kids. She announced that the homemade ice cream was for adults only because the kids can't appreciate the good stuff anyway. Maybe that was true in her mind, but the kids were heartbroken. They'd just spent all that time making something they weren't even allowed to taste. A few tears were shed. I spoke up and said, "Don't be heartless. Let the kids have some of what they made, even just a little." But my wife's aunts weren't having it. They gave me attitude, saying, "You don't understand. You don't have kids." I said, "Yeah, but I was a kid once, and I know how crappy this would feel." Still, they stood their ground. There's not enough to go around. The kids get the store-bought. If you want them to have some so badly, then share your portion with them. So I said, "All right then." Okie dokie. When it came time to serve myself, I grabbed a giant salad bowl, filled it all the way to the top with homemade ice cream, grabbed 6 spoons, and went straight to the kids' table. We all dug in together like a tiny rebellion. By the time we were done, there was hardly any left. The adults had no choice but to eat the cheap store-brand ice cream, sulking and trying to maintain their dignity. It was an hour of angry silence after that. I was worried my wife would be mad at me once we got in the car. Instead, she laughed her ass off and told me she loved me. Story 14. This happened just last year. My uncle took my cousin's phone, smashed it, and kicked him out. Told him he'd be living with our grandparents from now on. The rest of us, including his younger siblings, just sat there awkwardly until they left. He still lives with our grandparents to this day. Edit for context. I mentioned this before in a comment, but it's worth explaining more clearly. My cousin has 2 younger siblings, both of whom are actually my uncle's biological children. He's always treated those 2 really well and rarely even raises his voice at them. But the older sibling, the one who got kicked out, has always been treated badly. Anyway, one of the younger kids accidentally spilled Coke on the carpet. My uncle didn't see who did it, but he immediately blamed my cousin and told him to clean it up. My cousin refused. That set my uncle off. He started yelling about how he does everything around the house, how no one appreciates him, and so on. Then he said, "Screw it. I pay for this too." Picked up my cousin's phone, hurled it at the dresser, and told him he was being transferred to another school and moving in with our grandparents. And just like that, it was done. Story 15. One year, my roommates and I decided to host a Friendsgiving. Everyone brought wine, so much wine that we ran out of counter space and started leaving bottles out on the porch. After dinner, when everyone was already getting pretty schwasty, my coworker showed up carrying one of those massive blue water cooler jugs. But instead of water, it was filled with homemade wine his dad had brewed. It wasn't very good, but by the time we'd polished off the original 60 or so bottles, there were about 40 people there, and not one person arrived without at least one bottle. We broke into the jug wine anyway. The next morning, I woke up in my bed with 2 of my friends, all of us fully clothed, thankfully, and stumbled out to what looked like the aftermath of a house party apocalypse. People were passed out on the couch, on the floor, everywhere. One guy I hadn't seen since high school was curled up sleeping in a chair. I didn't even remember him showing up. Half-eaten pies sat on the counter like crime scenes, with what looked like handfuls scooped out of them. Every surface was covered in crusty dishes, broken glass, empty bottles, and wine stains. There were half-smoked joints stubbed out in beer caps. And that cursed jug, still sitting there, still half full. It was absolute chaos. And honestly, one of the best nights of my 20s. Story 16. My aunt, who'd been married multiple times and was generally known to have been a bit of a hoe, decided to tell my sister she was going to hell for living with her fiancé before marriage. She went on for several minutes, lecturing her about sin and morality while they were both at my grandmother's house cooking. We live out in the middle of nowhere and our houses are separated by a few small pastures. So my sister ran home crying, and my dad, seeing her, jumped 3 fences to go kick my aunt and her husband out of my grandmother's house. It turned into quite the scene for the neighbors, lots of yelling, running, and general Thanksgiving chaos. Eventually, we gathered up all our turkeys and carried them across the pasture to another aunt's house, where we finished the night eating pizza while the troublemaking aunt packed up her things and went home. They never came back for a holiday dinner again. Eat it. For context, we lived, and still live, on 2 roads that cross, surrounded by fenced-off pastures. At the time, my dad's sister, the judgmental one, lived across the pastures from my mom's mom, whose house was right next to ours, kind of a triangle setup. There were about 3 fences between our house and my grandmother's. My sister was at Grandma's when it all went down. And when my aunt started her holier-than-thou tirade, my sister took off crying in one direction while my dad went the opposite way, running and yelling across the fields. By the time he reached Grandma's house, there was even more screaming. We still laugh about it now that we're older. And I like to add that I accidentally lit those same pastures on fire 2 Thanksgivings ago. Story 17. My drunk nephew was giving his much smaller and younger brother's girlfriend a really hard time. She eventually left the house in tears, and that's when the younger brother finally stood up to him. Next thing we know, my son comes in and says, I think you'd better come out back. We head outside to find the drunk nephew out there throwing wild, slow-motion roundhouse punches, the kind you only see when someone's way too drunk. Fortunately, his younger brother was quick enough to dodge every single one. Then, in a perfect moment of sibling justice, he stepped in close and bitch-slapped his older brother right across the face. The look of shock on the older brother's face was priceless. Pretty trashy? Absolutely. But also pretty darn funny. And if I'm being honest, extremely satisfying. Story 18. About a decade ago, my aunt had a brain aneurysm. She almost died, but miraculously pulled through surgery. Since then, though, she's been different. She's classified as mentally handicapped and sometimes doesn't fully grasp things the way she used to. 2 years ago, our whole family decided to do one of those mannequin challenge videos. We explained to her that the goal was to stay completely still while someone filmed. She seemed a bit confused, but nodded and said she understood. Her takeaway, apparently, was to not move no matter what. When we started recording, she sat on the couch with her eyes closed and stayed perfectly still. After the video ended, we were all laughing and talking, but she still hadn't moved. We told her it was over and that she could get up now, but she didn't move a muscle. We said her name a few times. Nothing. Her son walked up to her and yelled her name. Still nothing. At that point, everyone started to panic. We were shaking her, poking her, calling out, no response. Her son broke down crying and told someone to call 911. Half the family was crying or screaming. The rest were frozen in shock. Then, out of nowhere, she jumped up and yelled, "Aha! I got you all!" We were stunned, completely speechless. Then, immediately, everyone got angry. Understandably so. We had to tell the 911 operator not to send the ambulance because it had all been a prank. I think she genuinely thought it was part of the game. Or maybe she just thought it would be funny to mess with us. But it really shook everyone, especially her son. He spent about 10 minutes outside trying to collect himself. We barely spoke to her for the rest of the night. I still feel bad for her sometimes. I don't think she realized the trauma she caused, and we basically shunned her afterward. It was one of the wildest, most emotional Thanksgivings we've ever had. Story 19. My stepdad decided to use his day off to drive about 30 miles out to a small airport where he'd just gotten the gate codes through his work. Why? To steal a bunch of fencing that was clearly set aside for a replacement project. And apparently, he needed my mom and me to help. I was about 13 at the time, just starting to form my own ideas about right and wrong, so I refused. I objected repeatedly. That angered him because I wasn't doing what I was told. Eventually, he got so mad that he told me I could walk home, got in the truck, and started driving away. My mom refused to get in with him, so she stayed with me, and we started walking. We walked for about an hour, long enough to make it back to the main road, when he finally showed up again. By then, I was tired, sore, and ready to give in. Thanksgiving was the next day, and I just wanted to go home, but my mom wasn't having it. I get a lot of my backbone from her. My sister was in the truck. I assume he brought her along as leverage, But it wasn't helping. He pulled over, shouting at us to get in. Just then, a station wagon stopped beside us. The driver, a woman with a big, happy dog in the back seat, asked if we were okay and if we needed help. My mom immediately said yes and got me into the car. That dog became my comfort for the rest of the night while I tried to process everything. The fear, the anger, the realization that I'd just seen real abuse up close and that my mom lived with it far more often than I did. The next morning, we called my stepdad and gave him the address just to let him know we were safe and had made our point. When he arrived, it turned out he actually knew the woman who helped us. They were old biker buddies. After that, we headed home, packed our bags, and flew to Texas to spend Thanksgiving at my grandma's, just as we'd originally planned. Story 20. Where to start with this one? It was what I like to call an ambush Thanksgiving. Some friends of ours were struggling. No money, barely any food. We found out they only had a few sandwiches to share between them. Her ex had just left, but somehow managed to leave behind most of his stuff. So, picture this: South Carolina. A bunch of pickup trucks rolling up into the yard, doors flying open, people piling out with food, decorations, and everything needed for one hell of a Thanksgiving meal. We completely surprised her and her kids, just showed up and got to work. Of course, it wouldn't be a proper Southern Thanksgiving without a bonfire. We built one out of all the junk her ex had left behind, clothes, boxes, and yes, even a fiberglass boat. Those flames shot high enough to burn away a few bad memories. The food was amazing, the spirits were high, and the booze was flowing. Maybe a little white lightning and green apple made an appearance. We had a fried turkey, good company, and enough laughter to shake off months of heartache. Most people ended up sleeping in the beds of their trucks, and when the sun came up, a high and mighty neighbor came by to call us trash. But honestly, I didn't care, because that night, surrounded by smoke, laughter, and friends who showed up when it mattered, I realized sometimes what some folks call trash is actually family. Story 21. It didn't happen at Thanksgiving dinner, but it was definitely Thanksgiving related. My aunt invited our whole family to her house out of state for the holiday. She made it clear that everything, the food, the setup, the whole meal, would be provided by her and her family. We offered to bring something, anything, just to help out, or say thank you. But she insisted we shouldn't bring a thing. Dinner itself was great. The food was good, the atmosphere was warm, and everyone had a genuinely lovely time. Then, about a month later, my parents got a letter from that same aunt, a formal typed-out letter, saying that we now owed her $75 to cover the cost of the meal. My parents were furious. We'd already spent a good amount of money traveling out of state to be there, and we'd even offered to bring food to lighten her load. It wasn't even about the money. It was the principle. If she'd told everyone up front that she expected a contribution, fine. But springing an invoice after Thanksgiving? Let's just say that was the last time we let her host a free holiday meal. Story 22. My dad passed away in August of 2011. That Thanksgiving, my mom, my boyfriend, and I went to visit my dad's brother. I was 17 at the time. All three of us, my mom, my boyfriend, and I, worked in special education with severely handicapped students. It's something I was, and still am, incredibly passionate about. The visit started off horribly. My aunt and uncle immediately began referring to my students as retards and a burden on society. They said our classes were a waste of school funding, that the money should go to normal kids who would actually grow up to be useful. So yeah, great start right out of the gate. Then my aunt's father, who wasn't related to us, showed up and decided to start grilling my recently widowed mother about when she was going to start dating again. He kept pressing her, asking if she planned to remarry, why or why not, and why she didn't know yet. It was, by far, the most uncomfortable and infuriating holiday I've ever experienced. Story 23. Last year, I got shamed for my diet in front of my girlfriend's family. Her sister is an overweight nutritionist. To be fair, I understand where she's coming from. She was bullied for being overweight as a child, so a lot of her behavior is defensive. She recently ran a 5K and even got the word run tattooed in cursive on her neck. She's also pushing 300 pounds. With that context, every year she tries to force dessert on me. Cupcakes, toffee, brownies, you name it. I'm actually very fit. I don't work out much in the winter, so I follow keto during those months. If not everyone has dessert, I think she gets insecure about falling behind health-wise. I decline politely every year. Last year, she started pestering me, and eventually I said bluntly that I don't eat sugar or carbs. She seized the moment to educate me with her nutritionist credentials, insisting carbs are essential and that I didn't know what I was talking about. Mind you, I have a degree in evolutionary biology and knew how wrong she was. She went on about how humans have always needed carbs and that I needed to listen to her. Before I could respond, her uncle chimed in. She's right. The extra carbs helped my migraines. I think you're out of your element here. I hadn't even started a rebuttal. I'd only said no a few times and then explained myself when she kept pushing. Then the mom added, "She works at a doctor's office. You could learn from her." In my head, I was cataloging dozens of comebacks, glycogen indexes, NIH studies I've read, government-subsidized corn and sugar, any one of which would have demolished her argument. But when I looked around the table, everyone had that smug, preconception-laden look, sizing me up as clueless. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and stayed silent. I could imagine how hard her childhood had been and how her career had become part of her identity. Poking, that would have done real damage. The perfect insults. "How's that working out for you?" Or "Your turn," while lifting my shirt, cycled through my head. 30 variations in all. But I kept quiet the rest of the evening. I can't stop feeling like I lost respect, credibility, and any perceived intelligence the family had for me. I didn't want my girlfriend to be put in a position where she felt she had to defend me, so I absorbed the humiliation to avoid making things worse for her. Now I have to go back tomorrow, and I'm dreading every second of it. Story 24. That uncle let it slip at Thanksgiving that his unmarried daughter was pregnant with twins, and then joked about her having a shotgun wedding. I consider that supremely trashy on his part for several reasons. His daughter clearly wasn't ready to share the news yet. He had no business telling anyone. She was already engaged before getting pregnant, so the shotgun wedding comment was not only tacky but offensive. He basically implied her fiancé was marrying her only because he was forced to. For the record, they're still happily married, have another kid, and seem to be doing great. This man, let's just call him Uncle Asshole, was an alcoholic, drug-abusing train wreck who'd lost everything but his clothes and his car after vanishing on yet another multi-day binge. Long story short, after disappearing multiple times and putting his ex-wife in situations that required STD testing, she offered him one final chance. She told him she'd stay with him if he signed divorce papers giving her everything except his clothes. If he disappeared again, she'd file them. He didn't last a month. She even let him keep the car, which she could have sold, just so he'd have a place to sleep. She's an absolute saint. And despite all that, he had the gall to slut-shame his daughter? The man should have been groveling at her feet, apologizing for failing her as a father, not humiliating her in front of the family. He was only at our table because none of his 3 siblings, 2 children, or his ex-wife had invited him. Gee, wonder why. Story 25. I've never liked turkey, and my mother told me I didn't have to eat it. She even made me something else. I was in about 3rd grade, I think. She knew it really upset me as a child, autism and all. My father wouldn't have it. He demanded that I eat the turkey and went to throw out the food my mom had made for me. When he reached for his belt and struggled to get it off, I ran to my room, locked the door, and hid in the corner. He kicked the door in and whipped me with the belt multiple times. He and my mom had been fighting for a while, and he was taking his anger out on me. After my mom made him leave, I sat at the table, bruised and crying, eating the food she'd made for me. My sisters just looked at me while my dad slammed the door on his way out and said, "Thanks. You just ruined Thanksgiving." They blamed my mom for years for the divorce. To this day, I never eat turkey on Thanksgiving. I always order myself a good pizza instead. Over the years, they've done other things to me, kept me isolated, until I finally cut all ties with them. If one of them had a funeral, I wouldn't go. All because of turkey. Story 26. My husband's 90-year-old aunt didn't show up to Thanksgiving dinner today because her boyfriend was being held against his will in the Walmart parking lot by a man who was squatting in one of her rental properties. Here's the kicker. They had actually paid this guy to get rid of the squatters. And once he did, he decided to move in himself and live there rent-free. There were sounds of violence over the phone, so the police were called. I took my husband and the baby home and wished everyone else good luck. Story 27. My uncle had spent the entire morning smoking opium in the basement. During Thanksgiving dinner, he passed out at the table, his face landing right in his plate. A moment later, he let out a long, wet fart and defecated himself. It ran down the legs of the chair and ruined the carpet. We ended up wrapping his lower half in a hefty bag and putting him on the sofa to sleep it off. He died later that afternoon, and the coroner came the next morning to take him away. We had to throw out the sofa afterward, as he had voided his bowels and bladder several times, possibly post-mortem, to the point that the hefty bag was completely useless. Story 28. My aunt's awful boyfriend doesn't like her being around anyone but him, so when she hosted Thanksgiving for all of us, he did everything he could to make her feel miserable about it. This included refusing to carve the turkey, refusing to make the potatoes, and then getting angry at her when she made them herself because she supposedly did it wrong. When she finally called him out on his behavior, he called her a terrible name. Right in front of me, my mother, my grandmother, and my step-grandfather. The worst part was that she didn't end things after that. When we went back there for Christmas, the police ended up being called. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.